Hello, everyone. Today we'll be talking about Bomarito's book on Buddhism and his chapter on kindness, joys in others. So let us begin. So kindness and joy, let's start there. A fundamental way of relating to the world is by rejoicing when good things happen to you, but either being indifferent when it happens to someone else, or perhaps rejoicing, but not as much as when it happens to you, or in the more extreme case, being annoyed that something good happened to someone else. And many times this latter one happens when there's you competing for a good, right? There's this cool job, both of you apply, it's only one job, so only one of you can get it, the other person gets it, and you're very upset, like you're annoyed at the good of the other. So we do this all the time, right? One of the fundamental ways in which our self-image, the way that we interpret the world through the notion of the self, carves the world is by rejoicing in what is good for us in a way that is different or sometimes in opposition with the way in which we rejoice, if we rejoice at all, for what is good for other people, right? We see the world as a competition between selves that endure through time, whose goods are in competition with each other. For the Buddhists, this is a fundamental obstacle to enlightenment, to living selflessly, to doing away with suffering, and ultimately having the best kind of life we can have given the kinds of things we are. So there's a very cool practice in the book about how to develop kindness and joy. So I invite you to do it. And the goal of that practice is to develop two different kinds of attitudes or responses that are loving responses towards others. And these are metta, or loosely translated as loving kindness, which roughly means something like a genuine concern for the happiness of others. We'll talk a little more about that later. And also mudita, we just loosely translated as something like sympathetic joy, or the feeling of uh, pleasure or satisfaction or enjoyment at the presence of the happiness or good of someone else. So feeling happy when good things happen to other people. And we'll talk about more about that. The way that the Buddha sees it, something like kindness or being selfless and loving are essentially kind of intertwined with having the attitudes of both metta and mudita. So that's essential way of being selfless in the world. So let's begin with metta, again, loosely translated as loving kindness. And the word love in English is a word that we use so often in so very different contexts that many times means something very different. So a way of trying to get at what the Buddhists mean by metta, the word again loosely translated as loving kindness, is by looking at some of the ways in which we use the word love or love-like words in that are not metta. So let's talk about the love-like things that we appeal to that are not metta or loving kindness. So metta is not a sexual attraction or infatuation, though there may be love in that kind of attraction, infatuation. That's not what metta is. Also, metta is not a kind of intense fondness. That's when we say, I like chocolate, I love the movie, right? So when we say love in that kind of context, we're registering or reporting the intensity of our liking or fondness for the thing in question. It's kind of the way in which we like or appreciate or that thing. Love is a very intense version of that. Metta is not that. Metta is not an intense fondness towards things. um Now we're getting more in the kind of more obviously moral categories, but metta is also not a self-regarding a way of relating to self. For example, it's not about my feeling good about you doing well. So sometimes people say things like, I know I love you because I feel good when you do well. And that feels a little too self-regarding, right? It feels like your love for them is ultimately about you because you feel good, right? So it seems like things are backwards. It should be that you feel good because you love them, not that you love them because you feel good. It seems that it's ultimately about you when it has the self-regarding attitude. Metta is really about others. It's selfless. It's not about you. So it's not this kind of self-regarding joy, even if joy is grounded ultimately in the good of someone else. And it's certainly not a kind of mercantile kindness. This kind of mercantile kindness is widespread. It's in fact, there's something moral here, but it's not as ideal as metta. So a mercantile kindness is a kind of legitimate kindness, a kind of you care about someone else's well-being, you want them to do well. But this care, this wanting to do well is conditioned upon a kind of reciprocity. So you care for someone, you're friendly towards someone, say only if they're friendly towards you, or even worse, only if they're friendly towards you first, right? But it doesn't matter if it's first or after, but what makes this kind of kindness or friendliness is that it is predicated upon a condition of reciprocity. You're only friendly towards someone, you only help someone, you only care about someone if they care for you too, if they're friendly for you too. So it's a pretty widespread kind of conception of kindness, and there's something good here, right? But it's just not good enough for meta. It's still not selfless enough for meta. Here's what Bomarito writes. Meta is the opposite of the tendency to look out for you and yours. I think opposite is not quite the right word. I think he didn't quite. He doesn't. He's just emphasizing that it's not that. But I think opposite is too strong. But anyway, the point is that meta is not merely like caring about yourself and those around you. You might say something like, "I'm a great person because I care for my country. I'm a great person because I care for my religion, or I'm a great person because I care for my town." And you're onto something, right? So if you begin like with looking at the spheres of concern, most people begin by caring about themselves. And that's fine, like you should care about yourself. But if you only care about yourself, then that's selfish, right? Like that's bad. That's vice. So one must extend the sphere of concern beyond the self. And a natural next step is one's family. So one can not only care about oneself, but one's family. And if you're doing it pretty well, you care for them just as much about you care for you, right? So it's not merely that you extend the concern, but it's equal concern for everyone and your family. So hey, that's even better. But again, if you only care about your family, not people outside, that's still kind of like the selfish. It's better than the selfish, but it's still as much too restricted. Your concern is only for your family, and it has the kind of lack of morality, lack of selflessness. And then you might extend it, and here is what Marita's pointed. You might extend it to say like your nation or your religion, so you care for you and your own might be bigger like nation. Then you think, hey, I'm so great. Like I not only care for me and for my family, I care for all this much larger group. And the response is, well, yeah, of course, that's great. Like that's farther away from selfishness than merely caring about yourself or your family. But it's still, and the path for virtue is not full virtue, right? There's still something missing. And what's missing is that you should care for everyone. Why? Because everyone matters the same. That's the moral claim. You're still failing morally when you don't recognize that, when you still restrain your concern of your sphere of concern for a subset of humanity. So meta is when that doesn't happen, when there's no such constraint, when one cares about everyone. It is a sincere, selfless concern for others. So it is concern for others, but not on the condition of reciprocity, not because they're my nation, not because they're my family, but because they're human and they deserve to be cared for. So it's a legitimate concern for the happiness and well-being of everyone, full stop. So that's meta. It's this general attitude for care. And like Mother Teresa here is a great embodiment of that. She went to India to help the poorest of the poor, not because they're family, not because they're an extension of her, but because they're human, right? Like that's the meta. That's the general attitude for love for everyone. So it's a great ideal. The other attitude is mundita, which is not quite meta. Meta is this general attitude for love towards everyone. This one's a particular instance of sympathetic joy. It's a particular kind of rejoicing in the goodness of someone else. So mundita is a similarly selfless, it's also selfless, response to someone, but it's a particular one. But it's a felt response to a particular event. Something good happens to someone else, and you're genuinely happy for them. So again, it's not the self regarding that I love you because I feel good that you're around, but it's rather this feeling good of the good of the other with no self regard. There's no reference back to the self. It's just outward directed joy at the others. So let's look at what it's not to give you a sense what it is. So you don't harbor some secret wish that it happened to you. Say if someone wins this prize that you could have won too, but you didn't. They did. So you are not experiencing mundita. If you are happy for them, but you have this secret kind of like I wish I had kind of, even though like you have both, right? You have you're actually happy, but you really harbor the secret like I wish it was me. It's not this like hidden jealousy or envious that like you wanted to. To the extent that you have that hidden envious that you wanted to, like mundita has been contaminated, right? There's less of a selfless joy. This joy, it is critical that it's selfless, right? It's directed towards someone else, not you. Sometimes we're happy when something good happens to someone else, but not so much for their own sake, but rather because how it reflects on us. For example, a friend finally lands a job that they wanted, and you're happy. You're happy because it's good for them and they landed the job. But not just that, you're happy because now you won't have to listen to them complain about their work constantly, right? So your happiness for them doing well is ultimately about you. It's ultimately how it benefits you. And this can be sneaky. Here's a sneaky way. A mother feels happy that her son was the top scorer. Like the son is doing well. And she's like, wow, great. She's very happy. But she's happy largely because it reflects on her, right? She thinks like, oh, I'm doing well. To the extent that it is that her joy is ultimately tracing back to her and how she thinks it reflects on her, to that extent that that joy is contaminated by something selfish or something less than selfless at least. So mundita is also very high bar. It's completely selfless. It's someone who cares for someone else because it's good for them, full stop. And that's a selfless way of being in the world. And that's a way of living selflessly. So metta and mudita help remove the mental habits, carving up the world into what is there for me and what is there for you in such a way that you respond differently to what is good, as though the self were more real than it is. So doing away with the notion of the self and endorsing these attitudes, these loving attitudes of metta and mudita, helps dismantle a lot of the sources of her frustration. And those are largely things like jealousy, envy, insecurity, resentment, and ultimately selfishness itself. All of those attitudes are, I mean, a lot of them are what grants frustration, dissatisfaction. And all these are grounded in this notion of the self. You're jealous of envy of someone else because you want that good for you. You're insecure because you don't think you're going to live up to your ideal expectations. You're resentful. You see how all of these are connected to the selflessness. And crucially, how in having the attitudes of metta and mudita does away with these attitudes. So it would be a good way of living. So here's what the way Bomarito puts it. By loosening the grip of these habits, the selfish ones, we get out of our own way and participate in the world without a bunch of baggage, this baggage of the self that distort the world. Imagine if you just naturally felt happy when something good happened to someone else. Rather than feeling insecure or envious, you're just really happy for them. That is the natural response. That's what you feel. Not in some grudging or forced way, but because you become the kind of person who naturally responds like that. Like you're not begrudging, you're not envious, you're just happy for people like that. You're naturally that way. This isn't to say that it's easy, of course it's not, but it does seem like a really nice way to live. And this is a good final kind of cool observation of Buddhism. Buddhism began with life is suffering, let's get over the suffering. But it really ends in a very positive kind of note. It says that it's not merely that you let go of envy, resentment, angry, frustration, and things like that, which is, of course, very valuable. But if you truly become selfless, you have this loving joy towards others, and you have this very nice way of living. There's a loving, caring, good way of living. There's a very positive element to the positive side to Buddhism. It's not just doing rid of suffering, but this was positive, good, happy way of being in the world, selfless way of being in the world. Okay, let's end here.